Hello, everyone. We are going to start up our webinar in just another minute or two, so please hang in there. Thank you. Good morning, or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the country. I'd like to welcome you to the Dash and Thompson Best Practices series. And this is where we take some of our experience and share some insights and tools for you with the goal of enabling you to potentially take this and use it directly in your organization. I'm Connell Smith, CEO of Dash and Thompson. Today we're speaking on lights, camera, and interaction. And this is webinar that will include how to best create some impactful programs, but more importantly, how to do that cost effectively. And today you'll hear from Eric Burgett, our creative director, and Andy Lean, our communications manager. And I think you'll find this topic very interesting. Before we start though, I want to do some quick housekeeping. During the webinar, you will be on mute. Please enter any questions into the chat line, and we will certainly cover those at the end of the session. And if we do run out of time, we'll certainly follow up with you directly. And please stay tuned, because at the end of the webinar, we'll be providing a link to a template that you can use to develop creative briefs, and I think you'll find it very useful. And with that, I'll pass it over to Eric. Thanks for joining us.
All right, well, thanks a lot. Eager to get started. I think before we do, I'll just introduce one more presenter. We're going to have the obnoxiously handsome stock photo guy assist us along the way as well. So he's going to bring some enthusiasm, so don't worry about that. My name is Eric Burgett, like you said. Glad you're here with us to talk about video as a learning solution. I thought, just to be helpful as we get started, to just give a little context or background into how I got here. Why am I doing a webinar on video as a learning solution? It's important to keep in mind I'm not a videographer by trade or by training. I am a L&D creative director that has become increasingly excited and experienced in video. So why am I so excited about this? Why am I pushing for more video and better video in this particular learning and development context? I guess for me, it really came from my own personal learning experiences. A few years ago, my wife and I turned a photography, little side hobby into a side business. And we do occasional family photo sessions or wedding photo sessions, things like that, and kind of went through that journey of transitioning from hobby into little side business. So there was just a lot of learning on the way. And everything I learned on my camera and everything that I learned about editing photos in Adobe Lightroom was pretty much self-taught, or at least 90%. So what was my process for learning and improving in that? Well, every day I would wake up and I would read 5 pages of the instruction manual and really just try to memorize it and let it sink in and try to let that just become a part of my knowledge base. Yeah, I think that's not true. That's not a great way to learn stuff like that. I honestly went on YouTube and learned, like I said, 80 or 90% of what I learned, I just learned from going on YouTube and trying to learn more about how camera settings work, how to pose people, how to edit photos. YouTube is just a powerful learning tool. You've probably seen some of these statistics. Video is obviously just a huge part of our everyday experience as consumers and just internet perusers. And it's also pretty clear that it's a massive source of learning as well. So why this growing popularity and prevalence? Obviously it's just more engaging. It's easier to follow. And I think just the more we show versus tell, when we're conveying new information to a learner, it's just a better communication tool and easier to follow. So hence, around our house, if we're stuck on something, whether it is the digital camera or just a plumbing problem or whatever it is, this is the phrase that you'll hear: YouTube it. Oh, I'm not sure how to do that. Okay, well, let's YouTube it. We'll figure it out. So what's key takeaway, Mr. Stock Photo Guy? Video is a powerful learning tool. This is not a controversial thesis, right? This is not an illuminating insight. I'm assuming we all know this, and we're all on board that there's just a lot of power in video as a medium and as a learning solution. So this might be where you're at. You're looking at your L&D department and you say, yep, agreed. We need less PowerPoint, less e-learning, click next, more video. Let's make a video. The problem is you can't just say video. You can't say, let's make a video. Video can mean a lot of different things. There are a ton of different video styles out there or approaches. Are you talking about an explainer video, a testimonial video, a whiteboard video? Just a ton of different, really, video types out there. So, when I say styles and approaches, I mean that in a visual look and feel type of way, as well as just a scripting, storyboarding standpoint. So there are decisions that need to be made about what style and approach would best fit the problem that you're trying to solve. And there's also a question of budget. What kind of investment makes sense for this particular training problem or this particular communication problem that you're trying to solve? So, you need to make those decisions. And this webinar is basically an attempt to make sense of those decisions, at least to help begin to categorize different styles and approaches so that you can take that next step in incorporating video in your learning solutions. So, before we get into these specific video styles and show examples, let's just, quick address a couple potential barriers. And the first question, or first barrier you might pose is asking, do I have access to video equipment? And if you say no, I'm not going to call you a liar. That might be too rude. But honestly, though, you have a high definition video camera in your pocket. Honestly, it picks up audio well, and the picture quality, is surprisingly good for how much we have access to this. So, in this webinar, as we talk about different styles and approaches with video, we'll move kind of from this left to right on this budget production value spectrum. And just to kind of give you some context of what the left and right, what the scale is in this, we're not talking about, you know, Lord of the Rings Hollywood movie production on the far right here. I mean, that's not, I'm more thinking about kind of in the learning and development context for most projects that we're working on, you know, thinking about what does it cost to make a video like this? What's an estimated way to categorize that? And I'm assuming kind of a, you know, as far as the numbers here, not a 30-minute e-learning sitcom here, just, you know, roughly 5 minutes or less, like most video projects. So what we'll do is I'll just look at a few examples just to help describe different styles and approaches that we've had with some recent projects that we've worked on, and describe them from a budget standpoint and just kind of purpose standpoint. So we'll talk about who the audience was for that particular case study or that particular example, what the message was. I mean, by that I mean like what was the problem they were trying to solve, or what was the communication message they were trying to send. So first case study or example is kind of hitting at that initial barrier that you might feel, and that lower budget, that part of the spectrum. For this project, the audience was new hire claims adjusters. So they had this idea that they wanted to provide these new hires with just some best practices, tips and tricks for their daily workflow to kind of help them understand what are the best ways to go about this. And so the idea was to capture some footage from experienced claims adjusters and have that, you know, that little 30-second, 1-minute clip to be a part of a video that they stitched together. So, and we were helping them with that. And what they did was they sent us the footage. And so, you know, this is basically what it looked like, where they sent us this vertical selfie style phone clip of, you know, 30 seconds long of a couple of tips and tricks. So, you know, looking at that, kind of scratching my head, thinking, okay, you know, how do we make this look, you know, how does it teach well, and how do we make this feel a little bit more engaging than just a selfie style video? So here's kind of what we did to try to make the most out of the footage we had. We dropped that footage into a little After Effects template and kind of made the phone vibrate a little bit to make it feel like a FaceTime phone call coming in, a FaceTime message, and then have this little notebook where you kind of underscoring the tip and trick that the point that he's making. So I'll show a little clip here of maybe 10 or 15 seconds of some of these examples. And just quick disclaimer, you know, on Wi-Fi webinar, this is probably going to be a little jumpy, but, you know, we'll do the best we can. And, you know, I think you can get the idea of the style and approach. And, you know, if you want to see any of these particular projects, shoot me an email and I'd be happy to walk you through any of these examples. So like I said, we had this little vibrating phone. You've got a message from your colleague and, hey, here's a quick tip. And there's kind of a question and answer format. So I think you can kind of see we took this fairly low budget idea and, you know, tried to make the most of it by finding this little background and playing with that footage. We also, you know, can drop in video like this into e-learning and make it interactive and say, okay, were you paying attention? Here, now interact with this and, you know, kind of check for understanding. So that's kind of a theme that I want to push on today too, is, you know, really thinking about how can we really connect some of these video solutions into what we're doing within an e-learning environment as well. So again, as far as production cost goes, this is where we're at on the spectrum, right? This is something we all have access to. And I think, I mean, you could say, wow, that's not an amazing video, but if the compare and contrast is with a standard bullet point PowerPoint, here are 10 tips for new hires. If I'm a new hire, I'm going to glaze over that text, and it's just not going to sink in as much as if it's a video message from a colleague that maybe I've even met before, or somebody that's in my same position. So I think even at a low cost, that's really a big win. So what's the key takeaway this time here? I think the key takeaway is make the most of what you have. So as you're kind of pausing to reflect on, how can we start incorporating video, or how can we take the next step? Really kind of make this about the ethos of what you're after. So second style and approach that I would categorize would be this motion graphic video. Sometimes these are called explainer videos. Explainer videos are usually more fun and upbeat in pace and tone. There's usually that kind of happy music in the background. It usually has a purpose that's fairly simple. You're introducing a product, or you're introducing a new idea or a new process, and you've got kind of icon characters or icons moving around to kind of introduce that process. So again, we're still lower on the budget. Usually you're talking about a team of 1 or 2. It really kind of depends on how customized the visuals are. On the left, if you're just pulling some images and icons and working with that, then you can really hand that off to an After Effects specialist, and really it can be a fairly fairly small production team working on that. If you're trying to do some motion graphics that have a lot of custom situations or scenarios where you have to get an illustrator to do that, then that's still a motion graphics video, but going to be a little bit higher on the spectrum. So hence the gray bar, the range there. So just to kind of talk through an example case study, we had this project with a construction company that is a larger kind of parent company that had a lot of construction sub companies, and they had this company, or this just company-wide message that they wanted to send, that everyone is a leader, and they really had this initiative about building great leaders, and they wanted to really change the identity of what it means to be a leader, and try to change people's perception of themselves, kind of no matter where they are in their job role or title, that they really are a leader in many ways, and should focus on ways they can grow. So definitely a soft skills type of it was a kind of a series of e-learning modules that they wanted to not just be kind of a click next type of e-learning with text and images. They really wanted the emotional engagement of having music in the background and some interactive elements. So I'll just kind of show a minute of that here. And so as you can see, visually, we really, with that motion graphic style, we leveraged that kind of construction look and feel, and use the blueprint kind of analogy and the construction analogies to kind of make that point. And so the script here, there's music in the background, and there's really an emphasis on kind of building a foundation and growing upon that as a leader. And then again, we didn't want this sort of inspirational motion graphic to just sort of wash over the viewer. So we put that within storyline, and in between each little 1-minute video motion graphic segment, there were these interactive elements where it kind of puts it back on the learner to say, all right, now it's your turn. What do you want to focus on? And then they've got to interact with that content and say, all right, these are the 2 things that I think I could focus on in the next 3 to 6 months. And then, they submit that, and it's something that they create an action plan within that e-learning. So, that really leveraging the video potential with the motion graphics helps us, that the motion graphics really helped us illustrate the concepts that they were going after, those soft skills, like everyone is a leader, and those messages. And then putting that within e-learning made that something that they could interact with and make personal and kind of take the next step. Okay, so let's talk about the next style and approach here. As opposed to motion graphic video, this is what I call the talking head video. That's kind of how I categorize it. And these are either testimonials or a host character that's kind of welcoming you into some type of learning content most often. So, and this can have a fairly wide range as far as production value, and I'll kind of get to that in a minute. I don't want to get too much into the how-to in this webinar, but just to kind of briefly help understand the budget range. Typically, the minimum setup for these types of videos is a tripod and an SLR type camera. Technically, you could hold a phone in front of your face, and yes, I guess that would technically be a talking head video. But, usually this is sort of the expectation for, kind of necessary minimum quality of what a viewer is expecting for these types of videos. So, again, not to get too much into the how-to, but if you do want to do this in-house, a couple of quick tips. Focus on good audio and good light. Find a window and turn the lights off. Try not to shoot these in a location where you're, using unnatural light. Try to find natural light and a quiet place, and if possible, get an external microphone that will really help take that audio to a better level. So, I don't want to get too much into it, but you know what to do if you want to learn more. So, as far as production team, these types of videos can be done with a pretty small team. We've done quite a few projects with a team of 2 or 3. I found that 2 is pretty much the minimum to really meet that standard expectation of quality. You want one person that's just dedicated to facilitating the conversation. You want somebody that's sitting in the chair, and if it's a testimonial video, they're making eye contact with that subject, so that the person that's talking feels like that's a more human-to-human conversation. So having that person dedicated to it, so they're not peeking behind a camera asking the questions, I think I've seen go a long way. So a quick case study, an example of this. So, quick background about the audience. This is a set of videos that we were working on with a company called Align that makes a product called Invisalign, which is those clear aligner alternative to braces. Well, their purpose was to help educate or persuade dentists, or the general practitioner type dentists. They were trying to persuade the idea that incorporating Invisalign into their dental practice was easy and rewarding. So that's kind of the problem they were trying to solve, or the message they were trying to send. And so I'll play just a minute to give you a sense. But this again is a team of I think 2 or 3 of us, and this is that testimonial style. We found a window. We didn't have any light set up here. They just had really nice window light, and we set up and had this conversation about trying to pull out the story of, okay, why did it work for you in your practice? What was it that really got you excited about incorporating this in your practice, and what went well? Another thing to point out was just to take another step in the production value, cutting the visual every once in a while to B-roll, where you can just have a little variety in the visual. So you're not just set up on a tripod and kind of playing through that for a minute and a half at the same angle, but just a subtle thing like that where you have one cut where it's, somebody walking down a hallway or typing at the computer. Just changing that visual a couple of times, even in the most basic talking head video, I think goes a long way in just having a higher production value and just a little higher polish. Another thing you can do is, up the spectrum is, having multiple cameras set up. You can cut to close up, kind of close up, back out, and just a subtle thing that having that variety in the visual will help it feel a little bit more polished. So, why was this style a good fit for this particular message or this particular problem they were trying to solve? I guess in my opinion, it really seemed to be, for this particular audience, being able to hear from their peers about what Invisalign meant to their practice just was much more impactful than, say, a motion graphic video where there's just kind of a narrator and music in the background talking about features and benefits. That has its place, maybe introducing the product, but when it kind of comes to this particular point of the message where, where the dentist is either on the fence about starting, or maybe they signed up and they're onboarding with the product, and you really want to get that buy-in, it just seemed like a good fit for this audience to hear from their colleagues. So a second talking head example, just briefly, I mentioned that host character. So, occasionally we'll do something like this, which is, before a set of e-learning content. So in this example, we had a series of really software-focused e-learning modules. It was a lot of really slide-by-slide demo instructions where, to navigate here, click here, then click here, then click here. And it was, it's very much to the point software demos. So what we wanted to do was put a human face at the beginning of that to really kind of welcome the learner into the learning, hit that sort of overarching high level, points about what is this learning about? Why is it going to be? Why should I be excited about it? And 30 seconds, maybe 45 seconds, little music in the background, and just a nice human-to-human connection before launching into something a little bit more pragmatic and practical with the software learning. So these were a few examples of using talking head videos. This, like I said, this can have a fairly wide range in production value. Again, I would like to encourage the thought of really not just thinking of these as a video solution, but, and I'm preaching to myself just as much as anyone, I really want to consider how can we bake these into e-learning and blur the line between what is a video solution and what is what we typically call an e-learning solution, like a slide-by-slide e-learning solution. And it might mean testimonials in shorter clips within a slide-by-slide e-learning. It could take a lot of different forms, but I think the more we blur that line, I think the better. And the technology is allowing us to do that where there's less barriers there now more than ever. So, as we move up the production budget scale, want to think about when does it make sense to say we really want to invest in a little higher production quality and a higher product from a video standpoint. I think there's really two key considerations as you begin to think about that. Consider the audience and consider the message. How big is the audience? Is this training going out to 90 people, or is this going out company-wide, 10,000 employees? Is the audience just strictly internal, or is it customer-facing? You know, is this something that is customer education as opposed to compliance training? Those are some key considerations, and I'll kind of come back to that as I talk about this case study that I think might help make sense of thinking about, you know, why put a little bit more investment into that production quality. So similar client here, Invisalign, and the audience was the same general practitioner dentists that were on the fence with Invisalign, and what they wanted to do, the message here is a little different. They wanted to show, what does a day in the life of a dentist look like? You know, what does it look like if just from a patient interaction standpoint? So the solution that we did was, you know, we had this host character that was kind of welcoming the learner into the content and kind of giving an overarching description of here's where you are in your process, and then here's what it looks like on a day-to-day workflow standpoint. So we hired a professional host character. So he's not camera shy, and he knows how to interact with the camera, and there's just a professional level in the presentation, which obviously, you know, impacts the budget, as opposed to having me up there in front of the camera trying to figure that out as I go. But you know, having this guy definitely helped the process. And then also, if you notice, just from a camera standpoint, having the movement flow through the dental practice is something that just helps the story along, where you're really giving this message of, all right, this is day in the life. Patient comes in, goes back to meet the hygienist, dentist comes in, and the host character is kind of navigating through that process, kind of escorting you along. So that movement, you know, having a nice steady movement is something that is a higher, you're just going to need more of a team with better equipment and more specialized skills to execute that. So, you know, for this project, you know, because of the audience, this is really a customer education, you know, very much a marketing type education or training. It really made a lot of sense to make sure we really were at that level of visual quality, but also, you know, storytelling, if you want to call it, or more kind of just cinematic movement, things like that were at that quality that could help send that message in that way. So, you know, here's just a quick shot of the team at that initial shoot, where we're, you know, got that type of setup that's going to help us execute at that level. So, you know, obviously, like I said, more polished look, more kind of movement with the camera. That's going to be a little higher on the production value or the budget. And, you know, you're thinking about more of a team of 6 or something in that range. Not 1 or 2 are going to have a hard time executing on that, especially if you've got, you know, one shoot day where the person's flying in and is and you rented a location to do it. There's really higher stakes at executing it right the first time, and really going with an experienced team and investing in that makes a lot of sense. So, you know, another example of what you'd see at this end of the spectrum, and I won't go into too much here, but as you move toward the right, there's another category here of I would call it storytelling, where that's going to be a little bit more on the higher budget. So, for example, like a reenactment scenario, you know, where you've got actors interacting, and you know, another example would be I recently saw a food safety training video where they did a a play on the Chopped competition kind of game show idea. There were two contestants, and there was this color commentary. What is the contestant doing right? What is the contestant doing wrong? It was a really clever way to go about food safety training. That's an excellent idea, and I think really effective. But when you get more into those creative concepts, storytelling concepts, obviously that's going to be a bigger team, higher end of the spectrum on the budget. So again, but that might make a lot of sense to move that direction, invest more in that team. Once you consider the message and consider the audience, does it make sense to really make sure you have that the pieces in place? All right, so that's my message today. The summary, I would say, is yes, we know video is a powerful learning tool. Make the most of what you have. Make that idea and just a part of the ethos of what you're creating. And I just encourage you to take the next step. For some, it might mean beginning with that iPhone and trying to take your PowerPoint type e-learning and really thinking about a way that you could add a little video testimonial baked into that learning, and just taking that first step of kind of experimenting with video as a learning solution. For some of you, maybe you're doing some video and thinking about how can we elevate this so that it looks it looks just a little higher production value and not quite like I'm holding up an iPhone here. And so I just encourage you, think about how you can take the next step. So thank you for your time.
Thanks, Eric. Any of you have any questions from the audience? I know that I've seen some questions pop up, and I'll ask them of Eric. We have about 5-10 minutes to answer them now. Eric, the first question we've got at this point is, what are some of the pros and cons of using in-house talent versus hiring someone?
Yeah, well, I think obvious pro to using in-house talent is just the convenience of scheduling and things like that. I think especially as you kind of get to the higher budget stuff, if you're flying somebody in for a video shoot, the stakes are higher and there's no retakes, right? We have to get what we need today, as opposed to if you've got somebody on your team and you can kind of add and subtract, and it's a little easier to go that way. Sometimes it makes sense to have somebody from your own team be the host character, even if they're not super experienced in front of a camera. If they're somewhat comfortable, it's kind of nice to have that feeling of, hey, that's one of us, that's kind of guiding us through this, and not somebody from the outside or just some sort of ambiguous host character.
Great. We've got kind of a twofer here. Diana was wondering what advice regarding software she used for editing video. What is your advice? And also, we've got another one having to do with what type of editing tools do you recommend?
Yeah. So what we use is, Premiere Pro is pretty standard. I think if you're just starting out with editing, that's a really hard thing to just start out and learn. Same with After Effects. If you really haven't had much experience at all with editing, After Effects is something that is used for motion graphic videos specifically. And Premiere Pro is an example of something for more of the footage style. But if you're just starting out, I would recommend a fairly inexpensive editing tool called Filmora, Filmora. I think it's very inexpensive. It might be $30 or $50, and it's I found it to be really easy to use for just those really basic videos, and you want to stitch and edit some things, or maybe add a little fade in transition, and do a few little things with it. But if you're just getting started, I think that's something to look at.
Great. In terms of learning, one issue that worries me about videos is the cognitive load. I think the solution is to split the video into small pieces of information, chunking, and among them promote interactions with the apprentice, knowledge tests, activities, exams. The issue is that beyond tools such as H5P, which I do not like at all, I cannot find a good solution to create environments where apprentices interact with the content and learn. What could you tell me about it? And any tips for people on using video specifically for rapid development?
Oh, good. Yeah, and as far as the length goes, I'll just say amen to that. I think, honestly, it's a struggle that we often have in projects as we're looking at videos, is to try to think about, well, just from a length standpoint, how do we make this shorter and more to the point? It seems like when we're in those early stages of sketching out the script and the scope of what we're trying to get across, we're often kind of in that conversation saying, how do we cut back here? How do we get to the point? And I agree too with parsing it out. If you have the ability to put that where, within an e-learning or within learning, or maybe it's even just, if you have a learning path and making those videos 2-minute videos or 3-minute videos, and they need to watch 4 of them, and they're separate launchable video objects, that's better than one 8-minute video, in my opinion, if the content lends itself to that. So as far as what tools, we've had success with Storyline 360, Storyline 2, maybe to a lesser degree. I might make less of a commitment to the older version, but I've had a lot of success dropping in videos like they're mentioning right into Storyline, and publishing as HTML5, and the result has come through pretty well. It plays well on phones, and it doesn't seem to be too heavy for the LMSs that we've been in contact with, but we're still kind of developing those and getting client feedback to say, is this working? And so far that's been a success.
What considerations should you be aware of regarding legal rights to use for photos or other content? Definitely follow the copyright restrictions or guidelines. I think, so basically don't Google an image and download it and put it in a video. I think that's just a general rule, unless you kind of search non-copyright images. But there's more of those image libraries out there that are getting less expensive. So I often use deposit photos, and that's more in the range of $1 or $2 a photo as opposed to Shutterstock. If you're finding yourself using a lot of photos, I should probably make the disclaimer that I'm not being paid by any of these people to say this. So Filmora or Adobe, they can feel free to let me know if they want me to be an advocate, but just so you know, these are things that I just use in my day-to-day and recommend them. So I would say stick with deposit photos. Don't stay away from Google Image. And we also have a blog post I did I think a year ago that has a list of free, I think it's called like free e-learning and graphic design resources or something like that on our blog. If you go to dash.com/blog and search there, there's a whole list of answering that specific question. Great. When do you recommend using storyboards to map out your content and flow of messaging?
Almost always when making a video. And actually, that gets into one of the downloads that we could send to you here at the end of this webinar. There's what we call it a creative brief that I would also recommend in pairing with a storyboard. And I think a creative brief is essential. And I would say a storyboard is almost always essential to various degrees. I think some videos you can have a rough sketch of moving from this content to that, and sometimes there's a script, it's a very scripted. Sometimes you want a general idea, like a testimonial video. You don't always want a specific script, but you want a general storyboard of I'm going to go to this person, and then it's going to cut to some sort of B-roll, and then I'm going to cut to a graphic, and then I'm going to cut to the other person, you know, having a general idea. But I would recommend pairing that storyboard with what we call a creative brief, which is just that overarching, what is the purpose of the video, you know, what are our expectations going into it, things like that.
And this last question might go into what you're already talking about. Have you run into any functional issues or challenges when dropping videos into Storyline or Captivate? I can
speak to Storyline. You know, most of the projects we do, we use Storyline here. So I don't know about Captivate. I'm assuming there is some, you know, that they have some capacity there, but I would just recommend Storyline for sure. Like I mentioned, I think it's been really successful dropping those in. You know, obviously, you know, I don't think most of these types of content are not 30 minutes, 45-minute videos. The load time on those might be more difficult, but you know, so far so good as far as Storyline goes.
Thanks, Eric. As you mentioned, we have some tried and true tools for you to share with you today. A training video, creative brief for you to download and use for your upcoming projects. We will send you a link both to the whole presentation that part of the webinar today that will be available for viewing and for download, as well as a link to this download. Or you can go to our resources section at www.dash.com after the webinar today. You can find us in 2019. We've got some exciting events coming up. We'll be at both the Minnesota chapter of International Society of Performance Improvement in February, as well as the ATD International Conference and Exposition in May. But we will also be releasing a new calendar of best practices webinars for next year fairly soon, so watch your inbox for that. Thank you all so much for joining us today for our webinar. As a quick reminder, Dash & Thompson is a full-service learning and development consulting firm. We would love to talk to you about your learning initiatives, your company, and how we can help. All of our contact information is here on the screen, and please feel free to reach out at any time. Have a very happy holidays and a great rest of your day. Take care. Bye-bye.